Boom! We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here wherever you may be. And of course, however you may be listening. So I wanted to do a quick update on where things stand with Iowa Hawkeye football recruiting and just kind of talk about the transfer portal a little bit. There was something that dawned on me this past week with regards to the Iowa Hawkeye football team and the transfer portal, specifically when you look at this year compared to last year. Now, the main thing is I want to discuss where things stand with in-state recruiting and the Iowa Hawkeyes recruiting at large for the 2025 recruiting class. I had actually recorded this before in the same video that I reacted to the Tony Perkins and Patrick McCaffrey deciding to leave the Iowa Hawkeyes to answer the transfer portal, but my audio wasn't on. So I had to re-record it. And when I had to re-record it, there wasn't enough time. So I had to just separate the two different distinct topics into separate videos, which is fine. It is what it is. By the way, guys, check out the Tony Perkins, Patrick McCaffrey reaction video. I also detail in that video where I think things stand for the Iowa Hawkeyes basketball roster as a whole, given that Tony Perkins and PMAC have left, and kind of what I expect with the Iowa Hawkeyes with regards to the transfer portal moving forward, given the departures for this team. Please, guys, consider smashing that subscribe button at the very least. Like, comment, share. Any engagement with the video, liking, disliking, commenting, helps the video out with the YouTube algorithms. I am so appreciative to everybody who has watched the video and engaged with the content one way or the other. Even those of you, and I always say, I try to get to all comments, especially ones that I consider respectful and courteous and are legitimately trying to point something out of substance. But even the ones that I don't consider necessarily respectful, I still appreciate tuning in and watching the content all the same, honestly, because I know that there's plenty of other stuff on YouTube to watch. I don't take it for granted. So for what it's worth, I tip my hat off to you guys and say adieu or thank you. So, anyways, guys, without further ado, let's get into this. So, last week I was thinking about the Iowa Hawkeyes football team and the Caden Proctor situation, and it dawned on me. I go, holy smokes. Like, we're already in spring football because I was starting to see some of the visitor lists, some of the soon to be seniors in the high school ranks and soon to be juniors in the high school ranks visiting Iowa for spring ball, spring practice. And if you guys aren't aware, kind of how most programs do it, especially Iowa, they have recruits on campus for the season to take in game day visits. Then once they have familiarized and they've sent all of the educational recruiting pamphlets and about the university and all that stuff throughout, after the season is done, they try and get the recruits back on for visits before spring practice. If they can't, they definitely try and get them on for spring practice. I would say in general, they try and do both. And they do that to try and heat things up because recruiting is all about momentum. And so what you see is this very strategic snapshot of going through the recruiting, the recruitment of for the Iowa Hawkeyes of a high school player. It's very, very strategic. And that's why a few years ago during the COOF pandemic, we heard comments from Kirk Ferentz and Tyler Barnes saying that they were not as far along in the process as they would have liked to have been and would have been in other years had the COOF pandemic not happened. And what they were talking about is, of course, their strategy, their timeline for getting recruits on campus and building that momentum, building that comfort level with recruits all the way up to the first window of major commitments. Now, of course, Iowa does tend to land early commitments before official visits, as we have seen, as they already have 5 commitments already. But the status quo is they have the timeline. The momentum starts accumulating and moving forward. And then it all culminates when Iowa has their official visit week late in June, which, by the way, I have discussed. There's pluses and minuses to having it the final weekend in June. Just very briefly, the positives to having it late in June is that if a recruit has not committed to a school yet after visiting other schools besides Iowa, that means that they have a good head on their shoulders and don't make impatient, impulsive decisions. And they are legitimately giving Iowa and therefore all the other schools a legitimate shot to land them. The final thing, and probably the biggest thing, is when Iowa does it late in June, they get the final sales pitch to land that recruit after all of the other recruits have visited all the other schools in the other preceding months before or weeks before the final weekend of June. And not only is it the final sales pitch, but when Iowa is able to leave that final last impression on a recruit's mind, they tend to have a short memory on the other schools that they have visited because everybody has recency bias. And so, it tends to put Iowa in a really good position when it comes to the recruits. Now, the negatives are, in this day and age, a lot of high school kids are very impulsive. Most kids do not have a super patient head on their shoulders. Okay. And I don't say that as like a mean thing or negative thing per se. It's just the truth of the matter. And so oftentimes, or at least half the time, I would say, Iowa doesn't even get a chance to have a recruit that they have worked tirelessly to pick up that momentum and build that relationship with in the preceding months before that, going back to the previous year even. They don't even get the chance to give that final recruiting pitch to a recruit. So, I tend to lean towards rather having it like in that sweet spot in the middle rather than right at the beginning or right at the end. But I will say that when a player is able to have that patient mindset, if they do end up committing to Iowa after having visited multiple schools, they're usually pretty steadfast in their commitment to Iowa because they've already heard all the other sales pitches and they have thought through it logically, calmly, and patiently, and they've decided on Iowa. They've decided after all of that, they have decided on Iowa in a very methodical way. So anyways, that's the recruiting process. And so anyways, guys, I was thinking about it and I was like, man, I see, these people, these kids getting on campus. And as I always say, guys, year after year, time gets sped up and it seems that the off season is shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I realized, I'm like, holy smokes, we're already in spring. We're already turning the corner for this next upcoming season. And I thought to myself, this time last year, Iowa had landed Erick All, Rusty Fett. I'm going to go ahead and get it pulled up here. Dejon Parker, who unfortunately was one of the only transfer recruits to not give a ton of production to the Iowa Hawkeyes. But this year, aside from Caden Proctor, Iowa has not really attacked the transfer portal at all. And so it's just very interesting. I think it tells the difference between where Iowa was last year heading into the offseason and where Iowa is this year. And um, a new aspect to things with name, image, and likeness is the transfer portal is not only for players. I don't consider the transfer, and you shouldn't either, the transfer portal to be only players that have left a school to consider other schools. I also consider the transfer portal a part of the same offseason process that includes players that could leave early for the NFL, and you work hard to keep them for another season. Players like Jay Higgins, players like Sebastian Castro, players like Nick Jackson. You know, Iowa did try with Cooper DeJean, but of course, you know, they weren't able to do that. And I think ultimately Cooper made the right decision. He probably could have only hurt his NFL draft stock by coming to Iowa, you know, because once you're already projected as a round one prospect, there's really nowhere else to go. I mean, you know, the difference between being the 23rd pick and the 10th pick is very small. Okay. Whereas the difference between being the 23rd pick and the 43rd pick is quite substantial financially. So Iowa this year did an excellent job of convincing players, proven players like Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, and that is why, and Sebastian Castro, and Nick DeJong. That is why we saw from all of these Iowa Hawkeye media outlets them saying that their number one, and Tyler Barnes was very open about this and vocal about this, that their number one priority when it came to the offseason and approaching the transfer portal and their roster accumulation or management was keeping some of the guys that had a year of eligibility to return rather than going to the NFL or deciding to transfer. And moving forward, especially at the college, at the football, on the football side of and I think this is equally or close to equally true for the basketball side of things, but definitely true for football. Moving forward, the biggest aspect or one of the biggest aspects to a program in this new day and age is keeping the players that you already have that have given you proven stats and production on the field or on the court. You know, like I said in my Tony Perkins, Patrick McCaffrey video, I would have loved for Tony Perkins to have returned to Iowa. That is proven production, proven track record, proven leadership to return to your program. And so that's another interesting facet moving forward in the college football and college basketball world is, yes, the transfer portal is important, but equally important is convincing players that have the opportunity to go pro to stay at your school. Whereas before NIL, you probably would not have a good chance of doing so because there was no monetary value. This, you know, a lot of fans have been, including myself, have complained about the wild, wild west that is college sports. But equally, on the other side of the coin, if this was 2008, Iowa would have had a much smaller chance of convincing a player like Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, and Sebastian Castro to return for one more year. But now with NIL, they are given that unique opportunity to do so because they have the money that and can at the very least be comparable or competitive to the projected salary that they would have gotten had they decided to go to the NFL. So it's very interesting, but nonetheless, Iowa has not really gone into the transfer portal that much this year. And I don't really think they're going to. I think if they do, the only position that they would really consider going after is maybe the offensive line again, although this is probably the best, regardless of Caden Proctor, this is probably the best shape that in the most returning production that the Iowa football or the offensive line at Iowa has had returning in multiple years, definitely in the George Barnett offensive line coach era. The only position I can really see Iowa going after, as you guys can see here, the only transfer for Iowa was Caden Proctor. And of course, we know how that turned out, would be the wide receiver position. And I think by and large, Iowa is good with the talent that they currently have. But I think they would be open to maybe a more veteran and or high upside player from a small school that they can bring on to give them more depth. That's really it. Other than that, I mean, Iowa's scholarship distribution is over. They are over capacity right now. So, it's just interesting to note that not every year is the exact same, and where Iowa was at following the 2023 season is much different, or excuse me, 2022 football season is much different than what it was following the 2023 season. I mean, look at all of these recruits that transfer portal guys that they landed last year: Nick Jackson, Rusty Feth, Deacon Hill, Dejon Parker, Eric All, Cade McNamara. And I also think it's worth noting, for any program, a measure of their success is the success that they get in their transfer portal pickups. Meaning the players that they get from the transfer portal, are they successful and do they give your program legitimate production when they get to your school at any point in their career? And if we look at Iowa over the last couple of years, I mean, let's just look at 2022. I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but Nick Jackson, starter, definitive producer for the Iowa Hawkeyes, all Big Ten performer. Rusty Feth, definitive performer. Had Iowa not had Rusty Feth last year, that offensive line would have been even worse than it was. They got immediate production from him. Deacon Hill, they got production from. Was it good production? Not necessarily, but when you go to the transfer portal, what you envision is getting a guy that will actually possibly give you production in any way, shape, or form at all. And Deacon Hill did give Iowa that. Again, was it super good production? No, but it was production nonetheless. Dejon Parker was the only guy that they picked up, and this is kind of surprising because he was the guy that most of us was expecting to be like a guaranteed producer. Like most outlets or Hawkeye contributors had Dejon Parker being a day one starter for the Iowa Hawkeyes, and he wasn't. I think Dejon Parker would have been successful at Iowa if he had multiple years of eligibility, but with only one, there was such a limited timetable for him to develop and facilitate himself within Iowa's culture. Eric All, day one starter, solid production. Of course, he got injured, which sucked, but he still gave Iowa really strong production in his lone year of being at Iowa. And then, of course, Cade McNamara, pretty much the same boat as Eric All. So before we move to the in-state recruiting and where things stand right now, I do want to show you guys the Iowa depth chart that was released. There are some interesting things of note. This is for spring ball. Had to get some black tea, guys, some black tea. So this is as of March 26, 2024. So it was literally last week that it was updated. Caleb Brown, officially a starter. Man, I had him pegged from day one, and I had Iowa pegged from day one with how his development at Iowa was going to go. I said from day one, what was going to happen was, and this wasn't me saying what should happen. It was rather what the reality of the situation was going to be, given the nature of Kirk Ferentz in Iowa and the culture of Iowa. I said that Caleb Brown would not be listed as a day one starter. Iowa would make him earn it. He would get limited reps and snaps in the first quarter of the season. It would start to pick up in the midpoint of the season. And then at the end of the season, he would essentially be a starter slash the number one target for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Boom. That's exactly how it turned out to be. I'm just saying. Jacob Bostic, I am really excited to see what he is capable of doing. He's been in the Iowa program for a few years now. He seems to come from a good family. I remember doing his recruiting video. His family reached out to me. He seems like a good kid. He's got good size, excellent speed. He comes from a track and field background. His dad, I believe, is a track coach. And plus, Iowa, it's high time that Iowa has a receiver that is above the height of 6 foot, that can be that X/outside wide receiver that can be more of a possession wide receiver and go up and get some of those 50-50 balls. The projected offensive tackle, of course, was Caden Proctor. That's no longer the case. And of course, Kirk Ferentz talked about that. I thought about doing a video on what Kirk Ferentz's reaction was to Caden Proctor. But the thing is, guys, is it's done. What's done is done. It is what it is. I did 2 videos on it. I've said everything that I want to say on it. I don't take anything back that I have said on the topic. And, Caden Proctor, I don't want to make a single I don't want to make a single piece of content about him any longer. What's done is done. And I have been fully transparent on it. I've been completely honest about it. Unlike what you would likely see from most other Iowa media outlets out of fear of losing connections with recruits, I could care less about that. I said what I needed to say on it. So that is that, and we're going to move on. But Mason Richman, he is a senior now, is manning that left tackle spot. And when I did my video on what the commitment of Caden Proctor meant for the offensive line, and I did a projected starting offensive line, one of the things that I said was, unfortunately, this is going to be a roadblock for Mason Richman. And I really would like to see what he is capable of being this year, and kind of see what the culmination of his time at Iowa ends up being, because he does have a ton of talent and a ton of upside. And, he's been in the Iowa program for a few years now. He's received solid reps. It is time for all of it to accumulate and for us to see that end product. And I was, on one hand, I was very happy to see Caden Proctor, of course, because of how talented he is at Iowa. But on the other, it was a bummer because that meant that one of the players that had been in the Iowa program for a long time was going to lose snaps likely. And one of them was likely going to be Mason Richman. And, that was a bummer. So he is looking like he's going to have the left tackle spot. We know that things change with Kirk Ferentz, especially at the offensive line. Most of the time, a principle that Iowa goes with is not the best at the position, but the best 5 offensive linemen that Iowa has, and they will find where they need to go on the offensive line. So rather than having the best left tackle at left tackle, the best left guard at guard, that sort of thing, they go with the 5 best offensive linemen in theory that they have on the roster, and they plug and play based off of who the 5 best offensive linemen, regardless of being tackle or guard or center, on the roster. So, and behind him, so it's nice to see Mason Richmond. I think he's going to have a nice year this upcoming year. We have Jack Dotzler. I've been high on him since his recruitment. He was a nice get during the CUF pandemic year. Iowa landed him out of Wisconsin. He was kind of a late riser, grew up as an Iowa Hawkeye fan. His teammate, tight end Andrew Keller, ended up going to Iowa State, but that's neither here nor there. We have Bo Stevens, Cade Piper. Looks like Iowa is really high on him. He was a under the radar recruit out of Nebraska. Iowa took a chance on him. They had an extra scholarship available, and they took a chance on him, and it looks like it's paid off. Logan Jones at center, Tyler Ellsbury, backup, Connor Colby. Man, is this finally going to be the year that Connor Colby is a man amongst boys? I mean, you know, it looked like he was going to be the next great offensive lineman at Iowa when he was getting early snaps, pretty much from the moment he stepped on to Iowa's campus. But then he's kind of had an up and down career, and Kirk Ferentz has talked about it, that maybe he was thrown into the fire a little bit too soon, and the bumps in the road are kind of understandable given that. But it is time for him to, much in the same light as Mason Richmond, for him to put it all together and have a really, really stellar season. You know, you look at Iowa's offensive line guys. I mean, the starters that they have, all of these guys have received substantial snaps in their career. Logan Jones has received like a year and a half, or 2 years worth of starting at the center position. Mason Richmond has had a year and a half, 2 years of starting experience. Bo Stevens has received a ton of snaps. Connor Colby has had 2.5 to 3 years of starting experience. Jennings Dunker has been a nice riser who has come through the program and developed. So there's a lot of experience on the offensive line, guys. This offensive line should have, they should be granted zero excuses going into next year, given the experience that they have returning. So, but anyways, guys, this is the depth chart. We have Jerry at Bowie in there at wide receiver as well, out of Tampa, Florida. That was a nice get for Iowa. He went to one of the premier schools in Florida. I'm blanking on the name right now. I think it's Country Day or Carrollwood Day or something like that. Or no, he went to Jesuit in Florida, who produces a ton of Division I talent. LaShawn Williams still starting running back over Caleb Johnson. I think Iowa is going to have one of the most talented running back rooms in the entire Big Ten and therefore the country. I can't wait to see what these two are able to do with another year of experience. So that'll be nice. We see the quarterback position, not really a surprise there. You know, really, Cade McNamara is going to be given the starting spot from day one, but you know, these two are going to be battling for that backup spot. Aaron Graves moved into the starting spot at left tackle. I mean, that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, there's not really any crazy moves there. You know, Deshaun Lee is still manning down the left cornerback position. Where's right corner at? You know, Jamari Harris has multiple years of starting experience. TJ Hall has received quite a bit of snaps too, but we haven't really seen him break through yet. Xavier Wanpa all of a sudden is an upperclassman. Time flies, guys. It really does. I mean, the defense is just loaded, guys. They have talent all over the place. Um, Really, the only other thing of note, Reese Dakin, the scholarship punter out of Australia, same as homeboy who was the punter last year, blanking on his name, um, who decided to go to the NFL. He is slanted as the starter already over Iowa Western transfer Ty Neeson. And then Trip Woody was a late walk-on get last year for Iowa. I actually thought it was a really good get for them. Um, and he will give Iowa nice depth at the kicking position. And he is a legit kicker who was rated as one of the top 15 kickers in the entire country by Cole's Kicking Academy. So that is a legitimate get there. The starting spot is definitely Drew Stevens, but we saw last year he started to be a little bit shaky towards the end of the year, and it looked like at times he was really struggling with his confidence. Now, we don't know if there was an injury behind the scenes or truly what the issue was, but either way, we expected him to have an even better year from what we saw from his freshman year, and he actually had a slight dip. So he needs to get back to, at the very least, what we saw from him in his freshman year. But it would be nice if he could do even better. Tory Taylor. How could I forget Tory Taylor's name? And lastly, guys, let's look at in-state recruiting for Iowa. So, well, let's look at the commitments in 2025. So the class is in really good shape. The 2025 classes. They have 5 really strong commitments. The tight end position yet again is really strong. Uh Abdul Hodge continues to recruit the tight end position really, really well. Um, So Iowa has a really good foundation. I said in a previous video, I highlighted that Carson Cooney is a top 200 player graded as a 91 by On3, the highest graded player uh, currently committed to Iowa, according to On3. Um, Iowa has multiple high 3 stars, 89 for Joey Van Vetzinga, whose brother's on the roster, 89 for linebacker Blake Goucher, 91 for Carson Cooney, and 89 for Thomas Meyer. So, and Iowa already has their quarterback as well. I think Eli Johnson will become like a high 3 star, low 4 star commitment as he puts together more film. He was kind of a late riser on the recruiting ranks. But if you look at the in-state recruiting, Iowa is not doing as well as one would think. I always say that it partly depends on where the best players live. Do they live more in small towns or do they live more in the more metropolitan cities in Iowa? We kind of see a combination of both here. Thomas Meyer comes from kind of a smaller town. Uh, Joey Van Wetzinga lives in the Des Moines area, going to Pleasant Valley. But given the fact that Iowa won 10 games last year and had an appearance in the Big Ten championship game, I would expect them to dominate in-state recruiting this year. Now, the quarterback position, I can look past this one because Iowa had already landed their commitment from Jimmy Sullivan from the state of Indiana. And Iowa, as we well know, usually only takes one quarterback in each class. So I can look past the quarterback position. But we look elsewhere. Jack Limbaugh, high 3 star, 88, committed defensive line, committed to Iowa State. Xavier Robinson, high 3 star wide receiver, committed to Iowa State. And there's actually one more, Will Tompkins, who committed to Iowa State as well. And so, we look at On3, And yes, Iowa does have two of the top five players, but so does Iowa State. Iowa State actually has three of the top 10 players. Now, the Iowa may end up being able to flip some of these guys if they are so inclined. You know, they may get the commitment of Mason Woods, who is LeVar Woods' son. And Iowa may get the commitment or recommitment from offensive tackle four-star Nick Brooks. Okay. Um, and so what it looks like now may not be what it looks like in the future. Okay. When things are all said and done. But you know, it's just kind of surprising that Iowa having the season that they did. Usually, when Iowa has a season like we saw them have, they lock down the in state recruiting. And especially you couple that with Iowa State having a uh, down year. I mean, what did Iowa State go last year? I don't even think they were bowl eligible, were they? Let's see. I can't remember. Let's take a look. What were they last year? 7-6. So I mean, it wasn't a terrible season, but you know, it was nothing crazy. It certainly wasn't a 10-win season. And then Iowa won the head-to-head over Iowa State. You know, it's just kind of surprising, you know, but I'm trying not to overreact too much to this because, like I said, the foundation that Iowa has in their 2025 class is really strong, and Iowa has a higher rated class than Iowa State currently. And at at all of those positions, especially the defensive line, Iowa is in on some really strong prospects. Namely, AJ Epinessa's brother, who is a high four-star, close to being five-star defensive line prospect, just like AJ Epinesa was. You know, Iowa is in on some major recruits, but you know, so I'm not trying to overreact here, but it's just like it's kind of surprising. And you know, if we look at this, let's say hypothetically that Iowa lands Nick Brooks, you know, and they land Mason Woods, which I don't think is a guarantee because of Mason Woods, as David Eichholt and Sean Bach said in a previous recording I listened to, if he was sold on Iowa, he would have already committed to Iowa by now, but he's not sold on Iowa. So, you know, really, and of course, Joey Van Vetzinga is likely to climb the recruiting ranks. The only reason why he's graded as an 86 is because they considered him a defensive line prospect rather than an offensive line prospect for 247 Sports. But let's say Nick Brooks commits to Iowa, and let's say Joey Van Vetzinga becomes like the sixth best player in the state of Iowa. You know, that's still only three of the top 10 players. Now, this is a down year in the state of Iowa, and it is certainly possible that multiple other recruits unveil themselves within the state of Iowa once the football season starts. But you know, I don't know, guys. It's not the slam dunk that I expected for the in-state recruiting. And you know, the bottom line is that for all of these recruits, namely Xavier Robinson and Jack Limbaugh, and I get it. Wide receiver is not a position of strength for Iowa currently. And it's very hard to recruit the wide receiver position currently at Iowa, even though they actually have recruited the position very, very well. Okay. And I've showed you guys that time and time again. Okay. Be that as it may, both of these guys had Iowa and Iowa State offers, and Iowa State beat Iowa for their commitments. You know, Xavier Robinson did postpone his commitment announcement But then when John Budemeyer had become the wide receivers coach for Iowa, but ultimately he decided to go ahead and commit to Iowa State. You know, they didn't even give Iowa a chance for the official visits. So, you know, it's just, I don't know, guys. I don't know. The thing is, my final take on this, because I don't want to dwell on this too long, is in the end, if Iowa is able to have a top 35, because that's what I always say, there's no reason Iowa cannot have a top 35 recruiting class in the high school ranks. If all is said and done and Iowa has a top 35 recruiting class and especially is ahead of Iowa State in the recruiting rankings, but they don't win the in-state recruiting battle as a whole, it won't be that big of a deal. But you know, if they aren't able to do that and they miss out and lose the in-state recruiting battle, then it's kind of concerning. You know, look at last year, guys. Let me show you guys the difference between this year and last year. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Iowa dominated in-state recruiting last year. Look at this. They had one, two, three, four, five, six, seven of the top 10 in-state players all committed to Iowa. So, you know, and I'm not saying that Iowa is getting like dominated like Iowa dominated Iowa State last year, but they're not winning right now. They're not winning. Now, like I said, ultimately, if Iowa is able to land Nick Brooks and they have two of the top four in-state recruits, and depending on what happens with Joey Van Vetzinga, if he becomes a high 3-star, low 4-star recruit, Iowa could easily have three of the top eight. But you know, time will tell. Time will tell. So that's kind of where things stand right now. Like I said, they're not getting dominated, but Iowa State is definitely in the lead currently for in-state recruiting. I just want to show you guys very quickly who Iowa is kind of has in the wings for official visits and who Iowa is pretty big on. Like I said, I mean, Iowa's current class is regardless of the in-state recruiting, is still pretty strong. And as you guys can see here, when On3 did grade Joey Van Vetzinga as an offensive lineman rather than a defensive lineman, they had him as a high 3-star borderline 4-star prospect. So, you know, it's definitely conceivable that he rises for 247 Sports. But let's look at the visits that Iowa has coming. So they have some big names on the official visit weekend. Now, what you guys see here and who actually ends up officially visiting Iowa are two different things. As I told you guys at the onset, because Iowa does their official visit weekend later in June, some of the guys decide to commit before they even visit Iowa on their official visit. But these are some big names. I mean, this is, you know, multiple guys out of the state of Florida, you know, I mean, I think that this kid is a long shot considering he has an offer from the Florida Gators. Florida, I mean, he has some legit offers. So, gosh, my allergies, man. you know, they had looks like one thing that definitely I have noticed in the 2025 recruiting class is Iowa is making inroads in the state of Florida. Abdul Hodge and Liddell Betts are doing work in the state of Florida. I mean, Iowa is definitely doing much better as I projected and predicted would happen when they hired both of those guys. So this is kind of who, as I said, Christian Hudson from the state of Florida is going to officially visit Iowa. So that's kind of who they have in the waiting room for official visits. And I'll have you guys covered once more names drop for the official visit weekend. But that's pretty much it, guys. I just wanted to have a discussion on where things stand for the 2025 recruiting class and just kind of talk about the transfer portal a little bit, the difference between this year and last year. I think my final thoughts on the in-state recruiting for Iowa is Iowa is not being dominated like they dominated Iowa State last year, but they are losing. But it's still very early in the process. Things can absolutely and will absolutely change. Recruiting rankings change, decommitments happen. Hell, Matt Campbell may not even be the head coach next year. I mean, you never know in college football what can happen. Okay. Um, Irregardless of that, Iowa does have a strong core group of commits that currently has them inside the top 30 recruiting team rankings in the country. So they're in good shape. They still have a lot of high profile names on the board, and we will see. I mean, it is still very early in the process, guys. Very early. So I don't want to get you guys too alarmed, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, share. Like I said, any engagement helps. A like, a dislike, definitely comment. I just ask that you guys keep it respectful if you guys can, and something of substance that I can actually respond to and react to. And I always am very appreciative of all the support that I have been given on this platform. And I really do enjoy talking Iowa Hawkeye sports with all of you guys, and very much look forward to talking more Iowa Hawkeye sports as we head into this kind of dead period between football and basketball season where neither sport is in swing. All right, guys. Smash the subscribe button. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy will on facts or feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. Love you guys. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye-bye.